Adventures of Sonic Episode 16, Tails' New Home. Tails' acting sucks as he's chased after by Grounder, with him looking horribly cartoonish at one point. I guess his acting will just horribly suck from now on. He gets grabbed by a rope from Scratch after lampshading that he shouldn't have wandered off from Sonic. Sonic knocks Scratch away, climbs up a tree to greet Tails, and manages to grab the helicopter full of Grounder and spin around it to land on it. He's very lucky he managed to land where he did instead of falling into the spinning fan and dying horribly in front of Tails. Where'd he get the airplane food and stuff? He blinds Grounder and tells him to make a turn, but Grounder doesn't trust them and takes the wrong turn. How could Sonic possibly have anticipated that the extremely gullible Grounder wouldn't trust him and would blind to the wall? Meanwhile, Scratch is foiled because Sonic cuts the rope on Tails and Scratch is knocked into the tree, causing Tails to fall out of the tree and not feel very good since he fell on his head. I love the consequences of the show because surprisingly, we see him with a bandaged head, a foot, and arm. Sadly, his injuries magically disappear instantly afterwards. Sonic brings him to a home, and the prospective new mother for Tails reveals she's a terrible cook, as that's the second time today she turned the oven up too high and made a fire. Do they really design ovens so that you can turn it up so high that it makes a fire? I doubt it. They get a lot of people suing them. And then the father slips and knocks the goldfish away. Apparently their old goldfish somehow moved away because of this. How? If Sonic had common sense, he would have instantly taken Tails away from these incompetent morons, instead of putting up with this shit for any longer. But instead, I'm worried that this will be the whole episode, as we have to see the bathroom being flooded because she forgot to turn off the shower. It's a shower, not a bathtub that collects water. And they all get sent out of the house. Then the woman talks about a previous disaster, and the house blows up. Oh, good, Sonic takes Tails away from that family, with Tails lampshading that he'd be safer living with Robotnik.
I think I'd be safer living with Robotnik.
Actually, he might, because this Robotnik doesn't have roboticization or even badnikification. He would be nice to Tails, so he'd be miserable, but still, the worst he would do is capture him. Out of nowhere, they get approached by a drill sergeant with a tank, and he immediately orders Sonic and Tails to do push-ups. Is this supposed to be the explanation for why Sonic, and only Sonic, can raise Tails? Am I honestly supposed to believe that out of all the adults on Mobius, absolutely no one could competently raise Tails? That is bullshit. This episode should have probably been about proving that Sonic needs Tails around because he's competent and useful, and not about, oh, every family he brings him to sucks. Usually in a story like this, where they decide they don't need the character proves himself. And if this drill sergeant is so great, why doesn't he just fight Robotnik? Why don't all the militaries of the world fight Robotnik? I mean, screw their other wars. Anyways, they run away, and it turns out the missus was signed up for artillery practice with no new glasses. She would never be signed up for that. She would never get to that point with such bad vision. So it makes sense that she would marry him if they're both into military stuff. That's a very ideal couple. Sonic and Tails take off from the potentially abusive parent, as I still wonder why Tails' injuries magically vanished so quickly when he would have been sympathetic being that way the whole episode. It's not like he does anything anyways. What difference would it make to the plot? Oh, he doesn't have to run? Grounder spies on Sonic with a telescope, and he and Scratch hide in bush suits, with Scratch talking in a missing child's report sign, advertising that Tails' parents are looking for him. Why doesn't anyone question the fact that what took the parents so long to send out a missing persons report for their kid? Oh, for fuck's sake. I already heard about the plot of Tails' parents not really being his parents, just robots to capture him before from TV tropes. But I didn't expect the show to give the game away this early. This is no better than in Colors, where we instantly learned Eggman's evil plan when Tails was doubting Eggman would have one. Plus, Sonic should have recognized Scratch's voice. Who wouldn't? The robots even look fake because they have tiny beady eyes. He should have figured it out immediately. Usually Sonic is portrayed as flawless and wins way too easily in the show. But because the plot demands it, and only because the plot demands it, suddenly he's flawed and complete idiot. Sonic looks sad at the idea of leaving Tails behind forever, but pretends he's fine in front of Tails. I like that moment. Then they reveal themselves as robots. But Sonic figures out that something's up because Tails' potential parents called him Tails and not Miles, his actual name. There's no hint at the actual show, as far as I can remember, that Tails' real name was Miles. So this is only a Chekhov's gun in the meta sense because maybe the audience knows that in general Miles is his real name from the video games, but in the show, come on, we only learn his real name is Miles in this flashback. After a while of filler where Sonic angsts, we see a flashback where we learn how they met, which is impressive. The games didn't really... Well, we had a Sonic Adventure flashback, but it barely told us anything about how Tails used to live. Tails met Sonic because he was kicked out of a bird's nest and fell onto Sonic's head.
Hey, what's the big idea?
And this was back when he was in diapers. Well, Sonic would have a hefty responsibility on his hands then. Tails showed himself to be a complete moron back then. He thought everyone had two tails, despite being around people, and thought he was a bird. You'd think the birds would tell him the truth. He also dropped Sonic from a high height and injures him. I just noticed, how did he create a river for Sonic to slip on with his tears alone? Unless he was a water kitsune and magically summoned a lot of water, that wouldn't make any sense. It'd be cool if he had water magic, but no, that would make him useful. He also says that he was lost for a long time with nowhere to live. I guess his parents abandoned him, but we never hear about that because forced lightheartedness. Why did the birds raise him for that long, complete with getting him a diaper and stuff, just to kick him out of their nest viciously? After a whole bunch of filler with the villains, Robotnik tells Scratch to give Sonic the ransom note, and then Sonic shows up in a disguise as a postman that he shouldn't logically have. Why is he wasting time with this instead of just using his super speed to free Tails from his ropes and knock everyone down? The disguises are just a method of padding out the episode. He finally destroys, runs around the robots to make them dizzy with their tails wrapped around each other. He then threatens Tails into leaving by saying he'll tell everyone his real name, not trusting Tails to be able to help at all, and in this show he's right. Sonic ties up Robotnik and has him get sent to a carpet magnet, and Robotnik lampshades that he never should have made Scratch and Grounder.
I never should have made you! You make me sick!
Scrap them then! Sonic delivers special mail for Scratch, fooling him with the exact same disguise he just took off in front of them. Was this scene really necessary? He somehow tricks Grounder into pressing a button that gets him crushed by a ceiling trap. Then Tails tells Sonic that he doesn't need to give him a family because he already has a family. Okay, but that's completely ignoring the lesson Sonic learned at the start of the episode. Tails being with Sonic only gets him hurt. He gets kidnapped. And he didn't do anything this episode to prove that Sonic would need Tails around. Which he does, but this doesn't make that clear. I already read all about what Tails was saying in the scene, complete with a picket fence, on TV tropes. But when I actually saw the scene, good God, Tails' horrible acting ruins it!
You're my mom, you're my dad, and here are my picket fence.
This is awful, stilted acting. I thought Tails would say that you're my mom, you're my dad, and you're my picket fence lines much closer to each other. But instead, the actor says them so slowly and separate from each other. How did that take make it past the... Did they just have one take? It's not a Sonic Adventure game. It's a professionally made TV show. It just ruins the scene. At least Sonic tells him he loves him, but when watching this scene, I'm too disgusted by the awful acting to care. And to think that was supposed to be the most heartwarming their interaction gets.
Whoa! You're not gonna use the L word, are you?
Well...
Then I will, cause it's a great word. I love you, little bro.
In Sonic Says, Sonic tells Coconuts that if he runs away from Robotnik, he could have a terrible life because he'd have no one to maintain him as a robot changing the oil and stuff, and he'd be outside with their electrical storings. Okay, this is problematic. This is probably the most problematic Sonic Says message there's been. Well, aside from the most infamous one. First of all, Sonic's implying that you should stay in an abusive household, by telling Coconuts to stay with Robotnik.
I'm running away. Dr. Robotnik doesn't love me.
It's your fault, you bumbling metalheads! I never should have made you! You make me sick!
Hey, it may not be perfect, but when you get right down to it, there's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home.
Second, he's telling Coconuts not to leave the evil Robotnik and get redemption, or at least be a neutral person, when he could just find a new home. He just stands directly in the way of his character development because meta logic. We gotta have Coconuts be the villain, cause status quo. This kind of thing is something I expected an entire episode to be based around. I already heard about him doing this before I watched the show, but as Sonic says,
No safe place to go, and no one to oil you and charge your batteries when they get low.
we've seen engineers other than Robotnik in the show before. Professor Vaughn could maintain him. I get the point of the message, that running away will get a child killed, but he's not even mentioning calling child services, which is the actual solution to the problem that a kid in Coconut situation would be having. Although, to be fair, I think if a kid called child services, they would just think, oh, you're lying. You're just messing with us. And maybe they would go to their house if they're lucky, but then the parents would just fool them into thinking they're good parents and they would leave forever. Really, I don't see how they actually work. So what was the point of that? Coconuts can't really work as an audience surrogate for the audience members Sonic's delivering the message to, because he really should run away from Robotnik. He logically wouldn't want to take advice from his most hated enemy, and he can't exactly call child services on Robotnik. Why would Sonic ever give him this message at all? Why? He has Scratch and Grounder already as enemies. He doesn't need Coconuts. Why can't it just be some kid and not someone we're already familiar with? Because meta logic. The moral of the story at the start of the episode is that Sonic learned Tails being around him only gets him in trouble. He should have figured that out a long time ago, but anyways, after Tails gets hurt only to annoyingly have his injuries disappear a scene later because fuck consequences, kind of ruining the point of why Sonic's finding him a new family, Scratch tries to fool Tails and Sonic with fake robot parents. I'm at least impressed that the whole episode wasn't about Sonic and Tails in the incompetent parents' household. But they still took too long to leave. The episode's creating the implication that I'm honestly supposed to believe that no adult could raise Tails in a safer, happier home than Sonic. That's just not true! Any orphan would be better off in a foster home or orphanage than constantly being kidnapped and threatened like Tails is. Sonic doesn't have to say goodbye forever. He can still regularly visit him. Though that might lead Scratch and Grounder to him and create the same problems he was trying to avoid, but... And if he visited at night, then Tails would be asleep. Anyways, the reason this plot falls apart is that Sonic should have instantly recognized Scratch's voice and realized the robots were fake because of the way they looked. I heard about this episode before I watched it, and I always imagined them to look like actual Fox people would. Nope! Even the Robotnik made Breezy, a perfect infiltrator robot who looks like a Mobian, just fine! Also, Sonic agreeing with the idea that Tails belongs with his own kind has unfortunate implications.
Tails belongs with his own kind.
I love that they bothered explaining how Sonic and Tails met. I never thought they'd do that in the show. They really should have gone further with it and told us that his parents abandoned him for having two tails and he was bullied, making him more sympathetic. They already were halfway there, having some birds he was living with kick him out of their tree. That looked pretty abusive. Instead, the flashback just makes Tails a brainless idiot, which is not how he's supposed to be. And it feels cheap that this is the point in the show where we learn his real name's Miles for the first time. That's not how Chekhov's gun works. His real name was only mentioned in a flashback in this very episode. Like, it just gets introduced out of nowhere. And there's so much filler in this episode with the villains and Sonic's disguise. This episode was a disappointment when I knew what to expect. And somehow even that wasn't meeting my standards.